of Medicine. Welcome to Ask Us Anything About Clinical Trials. I'm Scott Gilbert. Clinical trials are a critical part of the process of approving drugs, treatments, and devices. But you may want to learn a little bit more about them, and that's why we're here today talking with Terry Novchich. She's director of the Clinical Trials Office here at Penn State College of Medicine. Terry, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Appreciate time.
And Dr. Neal Thomas is Associate Dean of Clinical Research at the College of Medicine. Dr. Thomas, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Scott.
All right, we're going to talk today about, again, clinical trials, and at any point in time, we welcome your questions and your comments in the comment field. Whether you're watching this video live or on playback, we'll get an answer for you from these two, all right? Well, let's start with how clinical trials fit into that overall process. It can be a very lengthy process to approve drugs, devices, and treatments. Where do clinical trials fit into that process?
They are, in fact, a lengthy process. In fact, there are instances where it can be up to between 15 and 17 years for a particular drug or device to get through all the approval processes before we actually see it and physicians are able to provide that care. So there are multiple phases for particular types of trials, and I'll let you address that.
Yeah, it really, once the preclinical work is done, it starts with the phase 1 trial, which basically focuses on safety, either in patients with the disease or healthy volunteers. If it gets through the safety process, and about half of the medications that go through phase 1 actually get to phase 2, then we begin to look at efficacy, how effective it is in a patient population, still paying close attention to safety. If that is successful, then the large phase 3 trials are really the ones that you think about with a large randomized control trial where people will get a medication or get a device in a large scale, usually across multiple institutions across the country or across the world. And that's all extremely important and necessary information for the FDA to issue approval of a drug.
Neal, you mentioned even half of those drugs don't make it to phase 2. Why is that?
Oh, there's a very small percentage of potential drugs that actually make it all the way through. A lot of times the safety profile just isn't good enough. There are too many side effects, and before phase 1 trials are very small and a limited number of patients, and the dose of a medication is escalated over the course of the study. If they find that the drug is not safe enough or has too many adverse effects, then that will be the end of the trial. It'll never move forward.
Now, obviously, a lot needs to happen even before a drug or a treatment can make it to the clinical trial phase. Can you talk about that? What happens in that long period of time leading up to clinical trials?
Well, we do have what we call the preclinical work. You know, it first starts with somebody having the idea of a particular compound or a particular treatment for an injury or an illness. So it takes, again, many years to be able to develop those ideas and get through that preclinical work to then provide just truckloads of information to the FDA to then be able to want to move those into the realm then of human subject research.
You're watching Ask Us Anything About Clinical Trials from Penn State Health and Penn State College of Medicine. I'm Scott Gilbert along with Terry Novchich and Dr. Neal Thomas. We welcome your questions in the comment field of this Facebook post, and we'll pass those along to them, whether you're watching this video live or if you're watching it on playback. We also encourage you to share this video if you find the information in it to be useful. You know, Terry, you mentioned a bit about the FDA and their involvement. I know there are a lot of approvals involved, both at the FDA and right here on the Hershey campus, that need to happen throughout the process. Can you guys tell me a bit about that?
Right. We have a Human Subject Protection Office, so they're our administrative arm of what we call the Institutional Review Board, the IRB. And our IRB, mandated by regulations from the FDA, include scientists, non-scientists. So, for example, I'm a member of one of our IRBs. And more importantly, we even have community volunteer members who are able to give us that different kind of a focus when we review these clinical trials. So they go through a very robust review here institutionally to determine, is the science really good? Is it a good fit for our community? And do we have the ability to be able to do this study and do it well?
Neal, how rigorous of a process is that with the IRB?
It's very rigorous. Patient safety is always number one. And if the scientific integrity or the question isn't good enough, then that gets weighed into it as well. But the IRB is the board that on our campus and across all places around the world, ethics boards or IRBs review the potential benefits and the potential safeties and weighs that before things are moved forward.
And then how do those approvals interrelate with the approvals needed from the FDA?
Well, they are really required before the any clinical trial moves forward. So before even a phase 1 trial can get started, it requires IRB approval at the institution where subjects will be recruited, or at any institution where subjects will be recruited. As the phases of the therapy move forward, each protocol will be reviewed by the IRB, and that determination will be made.
So people getting involved in a clinical trial may wonder, well, I don't know if I want to be the first person to try this medication, but really a lot of careful steps have been taken to ensure the safety before that then, right?
There have been, and of course, that's part of why we talk a lot about healthy volunteers. In many of these early phase trials, they are in fact the trials conducted in healthy volunteers. So that's individuals without the actual disease or condition, and they're just a key part to the research process.
Sure, and healthy volunteers were the focus of our Penn State Medical Minute. You can find that online at pennstatehealthnews.org. That was just in this past week. We encourage you to check that out. And also, while we're on here, we want to tell you that clinical trials will be the focus of a TV show this Thursday evening, April 27th on WHTM TV, ABC 27, a special show where you can get your questions answered about clinical trials, 7:30 p.m. this Thursday night, so make sure you check that out. Let's talk a bit more about healthy volunteers, because that's an interesting part of the process. What is the role of a healthy volunteer in the typical clinical trial?
Well, there are different aspects of healthy volunteer research. Some of it doesn't relate at all to medications or treatment. It's really understanding disease. So our Heart and Vascular Institute in the College of Medicine has a large number of trials where healthy volunteers are recruited and have certain stimuli applied to them and to determine the body's response. That's incredibly important to understand the mechanism of disease so we can develop these targets. Healthy volunteers also can be part of the early phase clinical trials, particularly phase 1 trials. I always tell the story, as a medical student, I was part of a phase 1 trial of a medication that's now FDA approved, and I spent a couple nights in a research center having my blood drawn and receiving this medication. So it is something that is necessary to move forward, and sometimes for medications, healthy volunteers need to be tested before patients with disease.
It must be neat knowing that you had a small part in that process of allowing that drug to become put it on the market.
It makes it easier for me to support clinical research, and especially healthy volunteer research.
Terry, talk to me about some of the reasons that people who have a given illness or condition should think about looking for the available clinical trials out there. What are the benefits to them?
Well, in many instances, it provides the ability for an individual to receive a particular treatment or a therapy that they may not otherwise have available to them. It allows that individual to have should have a robust discussion with their care provider to say, what are the options out there for me with my particular condition, and to be able to be a part of that.
Mm-hmm. Now, there is a control group in these studies, right? So, I mean, there's a chance that the individuals enrolling will get the actual treatment. Some may get placebo, right?
In the later phase studies, some phase 2 and all of phase 3, most phase 3 studies, there is a placebo group. And so the only way to scientifically tell if a medication or a therapy has an effect is to compare it to what is standard of care. So I think it's important to realize that patients with disease will receive standard of care. They won't receive nothing if there is a medication or a treatment that is effective for that disease. And the placebo will be in addition to what they would normally receive.
Very important point. You're watching Ask Us Anything about clinical trials from Penn State Health and Penn State College of Medicine. I'm standing alongside Terry Novchich and Dr. Neal Thomas, and they welcome your questions here in the comment field below this video. Whether you're watching it live or if you're watching it on playback, we'll make sure we track them down and get an answer for you. I would think another perhaps less tangible but still very important reason to be a part of a clinical trial if you have a given condition would be knowing the good you can do for patients with that condition in the future, right?
That is correct. It may be that at the current time that you are taking part in a clinical trial, it may not have benefit to you, but know that you are actually contributing to perhaps certainly the scientific knowledge and the body of work for that particular condition that down the road may benefit others. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it's important when you ask, unfortunately only 1% of the U.S. population participates in clinical trials, but when you ask the people who have participated why they did, many times it was to further understanding of a disease and to develop treatments for the future, not for them.
Mm-hmm. Talk to me a little bit about Study Finder. That's a website, studyfinder.psu.edu. That's an important link to remember. We encourage everybody to check that out because that will tell you about all the clinical trials available here at the Medical Center, right?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So Study Finder, we are lucky enough to have received an award from NIH called the Clinical and Translational Science Award. We are one of 64 institutions across the country that has those awards, and it's an infrastructure award. And through that award, we were able to borrow technology from the University of Minnesota to develop phase 1 of Study Finder, which we presently have, where it will draw information about our phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trials. What we've worked on since then is phase 2 of Study Finder, which will be live as of June 1st, and that will be all of our clinical research, including healthy volunteers, survey studies, really anything that requires IRB approval that is recruiting human subjects will be one place, and that will be studyfinder.psu.edu.
Sounds like a great resource, something we should all check out then. Studyfinder.psu.edu. Well, I really want to thank both of you for being here today to talk about this. I guess when we think about the future and what happens after a clinical trial, there is one more question I wanted to ask about. What does happen? Let's say in that 4-phase process, let's say a drug or a treatment makes it through all 4 phases. What happens then?
Well, then at that point, depending on what it is, the drug or device then becomes available, out in the for the providers to be able to prescribe. There are some instances we are seeing a little more of the FDA requiring what we call phase 4 follow-up studies, and that is, again, from a safety perspective, to be able to collect more and more data when you get out to conducting or now providing this medication or treatment to a larger group of patients than just those that were in the trials. They want more information, so we're seeing more of that as well.
Great. Anything else you guys want to cover we didn't touch on?
No, I think we hit all the high points.
Good deal. Well, thank you both very much. We have Terry Novchich. She's the director of the Clinical Trials Office here at Penn State College of Medicine. We have Dr. Neal Thomas, the Associate Dean of Clinical Research here at the college. They both joined me for this edition of Ask Us Anything About. Even if you watch this video on playback, please do add those questions to the comment field, and we'll make sure we get answers for you that we'll also answer in the comment field. Feel free to share this video if you found the information helpful, and make sure you subscribe to the Medical Center Facebook page so you can be notified about future editions of Ask Us Anything About. Thank you very much for watching Ask Us Anything About clinical trials from Penn State Health and Penn State College of Medicine.